From a intermediate player's point of view, intermediate players also, like I said, can have the occasional bad day as well, where like really nothing you can do is gonna improve that game or that day. It's just an off day, it just happens. You just kind of accept it no matter what level of basketball you are. But for the most part, intermediate players find themselves in a situation where a game starts, you're playing the game, and you're just not playing as well as you think you should be. Because intermediate players do have that experience of going through that improvement process. They know how to identify mistakes they're making. They know how to come up with solutions and implement those solutions in game to help them play better by the end of a game than they do at the beginning of a game. The most common reason that intermediate players are not playing well in a given game usually comes down to the fact that they are probably mistakenly or accidentally running on autopilot. What I mean is the game will start and intermediate players will start playing the game, but they're not really trying. They're not really thinking. They're not really putting out real effort. They're just kind of mistakenly, accidentally going through the motions. Now, the reason this happens, and it's a very common mistake for intermediate players, because as I've said on this channel repeatedly, the intermediate part of your basketball career, which is the biggest, longest part of your career, is the grind part of your career. You're just sort of grinding it out as an intermediate player. The reason I say it's a grind is because when you're a new, younger, beginner player, you're making a whole lot of progress in a relatively short amount of time. Because you're a beginner and you have skills and abilities to build, you're making a lot of improvement in a small amount of time, and that's a good thing because that improvement is fun. If you were a beginner, but you were barely ever making any improvement, it would be continuously frustrating and you would never work your way out of being a beginner because it would just be too much of a pain. But because when you're a beginner and you have so much to learn, that means you have improvement to make and you're constantly making improvement. That makes that learning process fun in the beginning. But the way you know you've become intermediate from a beginner is you will notice that improvement, and thus the fun of making those improvements, will very drastically level off. You won't be making those drastic improvements anymore. And the reason for that is because when you become intermediate, you really are about 80% of the basketball player you will ever be. The reason for that is because as an intermediate player, you have about 80% of the base of the skills, abilities, experience you're ever gonna have as a basketball player. And so when you become intermediate, now the improvements that you're going to make, because you already have the vast majority of your skills and abilities, any improvements that you make are gonna be so small and they're going to take such a long time to experience them, most players sort of settle for being an intermediate player. They give up. It takes too much time, it takes too much effort to make those improvements to get to that 85, 90% improvement to become an upper echelon, accelerated kind of player. So most players just give up and settle for being intermediate. That's why I say being the intermediate player is the grind. So when it's a grind like that, and you come out here day after day, week after week, even year after year, and you're still an intermediate player, it's easy to get bored. It's easier to experience the repetitiveness of putting out the same effort that you're always used to and getting the same results that you're always used to over and over again. And when that happens, it's just human nature that from time to time, you're just going to sort of slip into autopilot where you're just going through the motions. You're not really trying, you're not really thinking, nor do you really have to though, because you've been doing the same kinds of things for such a long time. Usually if you're an intermediate player, and you're just not playing well on a given day, or you're not playing as well as you're used to, it's the most common reason for that, in my experience, is because you're playing in autopilot mode. Can there be exceptions and other reasons why you're not playing well? Of course, but because to me, the most common reason for that is being in autopilot. Let's address the best ways I know of to either avoid or get yourself out of being in autopilot. First, the more kind of minor steps I would consider in terms of trying to avoid going into autopilot is to when you're an intermediate player and you're going through this long, continuous, repetitive grind of trying to get better over such a long period of time, usually in that part of your career, because you'll have the extra time, you'll start to explore stuff like motivation and inspiration, because you're kind of clawing for whatever it takes to keep you coming out here, keeping you motivated, keeping you inspired to try to get to that advanced level of basketball. So it's very likely that you'll try to develop systems and contingencies for when you're out here, reminding yourself of why you're doing it, why you're motivated to get to be an advanced player, the inspiration, the motivation that goes into it. You'll develop systems and contingencies that you can pull on, rely on when you need to remind yourself of why you're still out here, why you're going through the repetitiveness, why even though it's kind of boring and monotonous, you're still going to push yourself. You're still going to outwork everybody, though you've been doing it for such a long time. You're going to continue to push when the contemporaries around you are just settling for being an intermediate player. Those players that sort of give up and just settle for being intermediate, they don't have those kinds of plans and strategies for having motivation and inspiration, reminding them of why they need to push. So yes, motivation and inspiration can help you, but a tool that I use personally, which worked for me, and I think it's pretty universal, meaning it worked for me, but not because of any specific reason of my specific game or any specific reasons why my mind works in its specific ways. I think it's more universal, where if you try this, it can at least help you as well to at least a certain degree. And that is because being an autopilot is more of a psychological problem. It's not really a strategy or a mental problem. It's not any kind of physical problem that you're having. It's more psychological, because you're trying to deal with the repetitiveness and the monotony of grinding day after day. If you're watching this video, if you're one of us in terms of this is a outdoor recreational basketball channel, where we're not playing organized basketball, we're not trying to get to the NBA, there's no grand, goals like that. It's just a matter of, even though it's recreational, we're still taking it super seriously and trying to be the best basketball players we can be. That's something that most players out here don't strive to do. So we're usually more driven than the average player out here, but it's just human nature to occasionally find yourself in that autopilot. When that happens, the tool that I use to sort of get myself out of playing in autopilot when I find myself making that mistake would be to really dig in on defense. Because usually when you think about playing autopilot and sort of just going through the motions, probably in your mind you envision that being offense. How you offensively play, how you shoot, how you score. But if you're in autopilot, you're probably doing that throughout the entirety of the playing style that you're playing in that given game, which includes defense. So what I say is, because although defense definitely has skill involved and definitely has ability when it comes to being good defensively, for the most part, being a elite defensive player is mostly about effort and energy, how much intensity you put into the defensive end of basketball. And that is just a matter of choice. How hard do you choose to play defense? Most players out here recreationally, especially casual players, but most players, they just don't put out much effort and energy on defense. Why? Because they're trying to save themselves for the fun aspect of basketball, the part of basketball where they can show off, which is the offensive side of the basketball. They save their energy for scoring. So they make the conscious decision not to play hard defense because they're saving themselves for offense. But if you're playing an autopilot, then that means you're kind of saving your entirety of yourself, your entirety of your game. You're not pushing, you're not trying, you're not even really thinking, you're just going through the motions. Now, because we are not one of them, because we're not one of those average casual players, and because we want to always be playing the highest level of basketball we possibly can be, when we find ourselves accidentally slipping into that autopilot, the best thing you can do is make the decision on defense to just dig in and just give all you can on defense. Because a lot of times what will happen is at some point you'll realize that you're just not playing as well as you should be, could be. Like, it's just not, you'll realize that you actually are in autopilot. And like offensively, because there's only so much you can control offensively, especially if you don't have the ball in your hand. When it comes to defense, you completely control how you play defense and the intensity that you bring. So use defense as a way to jumpstart yourself out of being an autopilot, because if you decide to dig in, to start playing defense, real defense, as hard as you can with as much intensity, effort, and energy as you possibly can, there's no way that you're playing as hard as you can on defense and then that doesn't translate to how you play offensively as well. You can't bring up that intensity on defense and then just be on autopilot on offense. And really, it is just a matter of choice, because I know it's easier said than done for me to just say, okay, well, just decide to start playing hard defense when you find yourself in autopilot. But that's why I say autopilot is so psychological, because think of the examples of the highest competitors that we've known in terms of basketball intensity. Think of the Michael Jordans and the Kobe Bryants and how it's legendary how competitive they were and how hard they tried in given situations. Like there's so many examples of both Kobe and Jordan where it's not like they themselves, even though they're the greatest in history, they're not immune to occasionally finding themselves being in autopilot as well. There's numerous stories from their opponents saying, you know, yeah, I was playing against Kobe, I was playing against Jordan. They were having an okay game, but they weren't their typical crazily dominating selves. And because of that, my team was actually beating their team. And at halftime, Kobe or Jordan only had 18 points or something. And then in the second half, because we saw our team playing better than them and their team, somebody on the opposing team would start talking trash to Kobe or Michael Jordan. And of course, that would be a major mistake, because just in whatever randomness of the game, they were in autopilot for that game for whatever reason, but then somebody talks trash to them and it completely wakes them up. And there's story after story about somebody said something to Jordan or Kobe, and then from there, they go off, they end the game with 48 points, and their team wins, beating their opponent because somebody stupidly started talking trash to them, and thus woke them up out of autopilot, and they became them, dominating themselves again. I give that example because that's something that you can do and probably should do out here when you find yourself in autopilot. Since being an intermediate player can be such a grind, it's a good idea to learn and teach yourself how to play those mental kind of games. There's also stories about how Jordan and Kobe would sort of come up with these stories in their minds about how even if an opponent doesn't talk trash to them, they will come up with some kind of idea, story in their mind that somebody did say something, even though nobody actually did. They'll convince themselves that somebody did say something, somebody did talk trash, because it then makes sure it kicks them out of autopilot or makes sure they never go into it in the first place. The way I looked at that was like, if it's good enough for them, it's definitely good enough for me. So teach yourself how to play those sort of mental games. Teach yourself how to either avoid going into autopilot or kick yourself out of autopilot by you playing the mental game, convincing yourself that there's challenges where there really isn't challenges. There's trash talk where there really isn't trash talk, if you need to. It's small stuff like that that can help to differentiate yourself and the way you play and your ability to play at a higher level from you than your other players on your level, your contemporaries, your opponents, people that don't play those mental games, that don't try to do that don't care about doing that. If you want to play at a higher level, then you gotta teach yourself whatever tips and tricks you can develop for yourself and your psyche to be able to achieve and maintain a higher intensity than everyone else around you. The better you are at evaluating and knowing that you're in autopilot and being able to get yourself out of it or avoid it altogether, and having strategies how to do that when your contemporaries don't, is just another tool in your toolbox to help you be better than that. Let me end by going through this idea of trying to avoid going into autopilot in the first place. Because even you beginner players, you will eventually get to this intermediate level where you find yourself going through this autopilot process and trying to dig your way out or avoid it in the first place. My experience with autopilot is when I would find myself in that human nature taking over and sort of just going through the motions myself. For me, I wanted to avoid that at all costs. One of my biggest goals consistently out here was be more intense than everyone else so that I could consistently just outwork everybody. For me, I felt like I needed to do that because I didn't have the talent that everybody else did. If I wanted to keep up with them, compete with them, and hopefully be better than them, my really only real shot of doing that was to outwork them. And the only way I could outwork them was by being more intense than them. And the only way I could consistently do that was to make sure that I avoided being on autopilot as much as I possibly could. That's one of the reasons I am so attracted to the psychological end of basketball, because it's that psychology that would allow me to keep up that intensity. Those mind games I would play with myself to do whatever I needed to do to avoid going into autopilot. I wanted to keep my intensity as high as I could, as often as I could, including being super laser focused as often as I could. For me, that meant sort of living basketball, making basketball a lifestyle, which was fine and fun, and I'm glad that I let basketball be like my entire being for that period in my life. But I'm cautioning you guys, if you do that, and I hope you do, just to experience it at least at some point in your basketball career, the caution is there is a cost, a price to pay that comes with doing that, with having that high intensity all the time, having that laser focus all the time. There is a price to be paid, and that price comes in the form of fatigue. It comes in wear and tear. Ideally, you're super intense all the time. Ideally, you're super laser focused all the time. But that's not realistic without there being some fallout from that, at least eventually. When I was doing that, when I was attempting to be super intense and super focused all the time, I didn't factor in the fact that, going as hard as I can all the time, I probably can't forever maintain that. I was young, and I felt like endurance was one of my few talents and one of my few strengths. Therefore, maintaining super high intensity and super high focus at all times, every time, there was not ever that was a positive thing. I didn't realize there was going to be negative effects of doing so. But if there were for me, and that kind of longevity for endurance is one of the few talents I actually had. If burnout can happen to me, it can happen to you as well. So yes, there are definitely times where you should be super high intensity. There are times when you should definitely have super laser focus and use those tools to either help dig you out of or avoid altogether going into autopilot. But I caution you to not make the mistake that I did, which is like just use those tools all day, every every game to constantly avoid going into autopilot. It just became a process, a routine for me for, being super high intensity, being super focused every day, all day, and never sort of letting my guard down until one day I literally just found myself exhausted. It went from like on Saturday, I was super high focused, super high intensity, all kinds of energy, never on autopilot. And then like on Monday, I was just exhausted and there was nothing I could do to get out of that exhaustion. At some point, you're going to just completely fatigue your adrenals and you're not going to be able to muster that focus and that intensity anymore. You're just going to completely drain yourself. Eventually, it happens to everybody. So instead of trying to maintain that super high focus and that super high intensity all the time in order to avoid going into autopilot ever, my advice to you, and if I could go back in time, my advice to the past me would be smart about how you do it. Be selective how you do it. Develop systems, plans, strategies, how you can elevate your intensity, elevate your focus when you need to, and then have a plan and a strategy as to when you feel fatigue start to set in from being super high intensity, from having that super laser focus all the time. When you feel the fatigue start to creep in, use that as your indicator that, okay, now it's time to back off and it's time for rest and recovery. Never made sense to me back when I was doing it because I just had this illusion, this mistake that I could just always and forever be super high intensity and laser focused without needing any kind of rest. And that if I started to feel fatigue from it, that meant that I just needed to push harder. But that was a mistake, and it's something that I should have avoided and that you can and should avoid as well. A much better process to go through is learn and teach yourself how to reach those heights of intensity, those heights of super laser focus. Teach yourself how to get there, what you have to go through, the process that you go through to reach those super high levels. And then when you start to feel fatigued, learn how to back off, rest and recover, bring that intensity and that focus down intentionally. And then when you're actually recovered, bring it back up. Teach yourself how to go through that process over and over and over again, because what will happen is if you actually rest, if you actually recover, your ability to take that intensity up, to take that focus up, will get better every time you rest and recover. But it's not going to get better unless and until you actually do rest and recover. So it's a step program. You bring your intensity and focus up, get fatigued, rest. Bring it back up, rest. Bring it up again and again and again, so that every time you bring it back up, it's higher than it was last time. But it's higher because you actually rested and recovered, recuperated, so that the next time you bring it up, it's even better. It's higher, it's more intense, it's more focused than it was last time. But if you only ever bring it up one time, and then you just try to maintain that height one time, it's gonna go down, and as it's going down, no matter how much you fight, no matter how much you try to avoid the decline, you can't stop it. So instead of that, instead of making the mistake that I did, step yourself. Bring it up. Rest, recover, bring it up, rest, recover, and just get better and better and better. Doing so will not only help you to avoid going into autopilot, but when you find yourself in autopilot as you're going through that step motion, the easier and faster you'll be able to jumpstart yourself out of being in autopilot, and thus being able to make yourself play better in and during actual game competition. So I want to thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, if you found it informative, if you think it's going to help you at all to actually play better during games, or at least from game to game in a given day, then please subscribe to the channel. And let us know down in the comments, what do you do? What are techniques that you use to help yourself start playing better in the midst of competition? But before you comment, make sure you hit that thanks button down below, because not only does hitting that thanks button directly support the channel, but it also highlights any comments that you make, making any comment you make stand out from any other comment. So for anyone that does hit that thanks button, know I genuinely appreciate it. As always, like, share, comment, like I said, make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified whenever any video goes live on this channel. And until then, see you guys next week.
Never fade to black. Brick City, airball whispers in the crowd. Fumble, dribble, ankle stiff, head too loud. Court feels heavy, feet stuck in the quicksand. Jersey on my back, but I ain't feeling like the man. Miss shots, hearts a rim, rattling beat. Coach yelling from the sideline, stay on your feet. Eyes on the clock, time's ticking, no rewind. But I ain't quitting, nah, gotta realign. Bounce back, no slack, keep the grind intact. When the pressure's on high, that's when I react. Find a problem, feel the pain, let it fuel my attack. Record the struggle, build a plan, never fade to black. Turn the L into a lesson, snapshot the scene. Every miss, every stumble, keep it in the machine. Replay the tape, slow-mo, analyze the pain. Learn the angle of the hustle, let it burn in my brain. Dump my doubt in the fire, burn that hesitation. Build a system brick by brick, no vacation. Emotions like the playbook, each one a clue. If it stung, I remember when the struggle feels new. Bounce back, no slack, keep the grind intact. When the pressure's on high, that's when I react. Find a problem, feel the pain, let it fuel my attack. Record the struggle, build a plan, never fade to black.